Greetings, we are in Senior English B, and our objective today, this hour now, is to spend a little time talking about the great poem by Tennyson, Ulysses. I'm going to start on my whiteboard. We have already commented, I believe, when we talked about that shoe factory story, that one of the ways to talk about a nation or a group of people is to talk about them in a tripartite or three-part analysis, where we talk about their, first of all, begetting, coming together as a group, right? Some groups, some nations, some tribes that turn into nations, they peter out right away for any number of reasons. But some continue to grow and evolve, and we will call that ascension, RB, right? But there comes a moment when nations, when groups, when teams, whatever group you want to talk about sociologically speaking, begin to look over their shoulder to a golden age, right? And they say about that time, it was a better time than it is now. This is often what we refer to as the declension, the decline of a peoples, okay? We are in roughly 1880 in England, and let's just say it out loud. Our shoe factory story proves it. When Schaefer goes to bed that night, when our owners of our other factories, I believe it was Beck in my story, goes to bed that night along with Hernandez, there is this sense, something is wrong. Something is wrong. In other words, we've been doing it for England. We've been doing this thing called our nation since at least 1000 Common Era. That's about 800 years ago. And it's starting to look like it's the end. People are frightened. They believe that it really is the end, maybe, of England. Enter into the picture Tennyson. Lord Tennyson is the poet laureate of England. Now, what is that? Do you know what that term even means? What is a poet laureate? The poet who is given the title of speaking for the entire group of people, the nation. He's given that level of fame. And as poet laureate, he will turn to two places in the past to talk about England's greatness. One, he will go to the stories of Homer and the Homeric Troy tale. Two, he will go to the stories of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. Okay? Today, we're going to talk about the first of those attempts. His famous poem, Ulysses. You should have your hymnal open now to page 971. You ought to have it in front of you. And we will now be looking at this poem, and we will begin at 2A. We will then do a reading of the poem, and we will finish with a, we will begin at 2B, and then we will finish with a conversation at 2A, messages, themes, and the like. And of course, helping you as you get ready to maybe outline the paper about Ulysses' view of old age. There are two ways to read the poem Ulysses. I'm starting now at 2B. Two ways to read this poem. One, this poem can be read as a personal statement to the reader, as an individual. Two, this poem can be read as a statement to all of England. It was read in the day it was published on both levels, but more importantly on the second level, as a call to all English peoples. Are you looking at my whiteboard again? As a call to all English peoples to not give up, to not quit, and to believe that England still had greatness in front of it, not just behind it. Okay? Now, how does he do this? Well, he writes, for 2B, for your notes, he writes what we call a dramatic monologue. Now, we're going to see a number of these here in the next few days, so I want you to put that term in your notes, and we're going to talk about it. A dramatic monologue. Okay? Now, let's take that term in reverse order. If I'm having a dialogue, what am I doing? I'm conversing with another person. That's dialogue. Then what is a monologue? Write it down if you know. What is a monologue? It's where an individual, one speaker is speaking, right? If a dialogue is two people speaking, a monologue, mono meaning one person speaking. Got me? Well, then what is the dramatic part of a dramatic monologue? Well, in this case, dramatic here doesn't mean 8th grade drama, drama, but rather it means that there is some kind of a dramatic setting that you, the reader, have to try to figure out in regards to the speaker of the poem. You have to kind of induce or infer from the poem two things. One, who is the speaker of the poem? Two, who's the speaker speaking to? What's the context that the speaker is speaking? Another way to say this at 2B is that a dramatic monologue is basically like a Shakespearean soliloquy. Do you remember when we used that term when we talked about Shakespeare? A soliloquy by Hamlet is when he comes to the front of the stage alone, soul, S-O-L, and says to be or not to be, that is the question, speaking alone. A dramatic monologue is like a soliloquy where a single speaker is speaking and you have to adduce, as the reader, two things. One, who is this person speaking? In case identified already. Two, speaking to whom? What's the dramatic context? Got me? Now let's go to the poem. Tennyson was very interested in Greek mythology, and he loved the story of the Troy tale. Do you remember that story? The story that ultimately has Greeks fighting against those of the city of Troy. We call them Trojans for that reason, right? Outside the city of Troy, sometimes the city of Troy was called Ilium, which is why the story, the poem that tells about this is Homer's Iliad, you'll remember. And at the end of that battle, the way you'll remember that Troy falls is that a cat named Odysseus comes up with a plan to build a large, hollow wooden horse, where a bunch of soldiers crawl up inside and hide. The Trojans are stupid enough to believe that the horse is good fortune, push it inside of their city. Under cover of night, the guys inside come out, open the city gates. The rest of the Greek troops have returned, and they destroy entirely the city. The guy who invented that concept was the great and mighty warrior Odysseus. You'll maybe remember a little bit about this cat. He left his island home of Ithaca with his beautiful wife Penelope and his young son, right, Mr. Roberts, you're right, Telemachus. So he left his young son Telemachus there, and off he goes. He thinks he'll be back in 2 months. The fighting at the walls of Troy, 10 years. Odysseus then leaves the walls of Troy after they've been destroyed, and he starts heading home. He does not get home. He ends up, you'll recall, being shipwrecked on the island of Calypso, where he stays for 7 years. He goes through all kinds of adventures. He has to fight against the monster Polyphemus. Finally, he gets home to his island home of Ithaca. Are you ready for this? It's been 20 years since he left. His little boy Telemachus ain't no little boy anymore, right? His little boy Telemachus has grown up. In the meantime, the rumor is that Odysseus has died. He has a beautiful wife, Penelope, and a whole bunch, about 250 bad guys, they're referred to as suitors in the poem, arrive at his castle and say, Odysseus is dead, you must marry one of us so that we can then become king. Because Odysseus' wife is still alive, Telemachus can't immediately become king. And so you have these bad guys staying in the house. When Odysseus arrives, two important things happen, as you know. One, he has to make his disclosure to his son. Telemachus has never seen his daddy, right? Not since he was an infant, so he's never seen his daddy. And so his dad has to convince his boy, no, it's me, for reals. And then secondly, they figure out a plan where the goddess Athena changes Odysseus into an old man. He is allowed inside of the castle because they don't know who he is. Penelope invents a trial, you'll remember, where she lines up 12 axe heads and she brings out Odysseus' famous hunting bow. The trial is simple. Whoever can string the bow and can shoot the arrow through all 12 axe heads will be my next husband. All of the men try it and they cannot do it. Even Telemachus tries to string the bow. Cannot string the bow. It's too difficult to string it. Now, for those of you who hunt with a compound bow, you understand we're talking about what we would call today a recurve bow. That is to say, a bow that literally has to be compressed. The string must be set on top, and then you can draw the bow. Nobody can even string the bow. Telemachus says, well, what about the old fart at the back, the old beggar guy? And they all, of course, have been laughing at him. The old guy is Odysseus. And Odysseus, in a second, strings the bow, is immediately changed by Athena into who he really is. And then he and Telemachus kill the ever-living snot out of all those guys, right? It's a pretty brutal scene. At the very end, of course, Penelope, his wife, has been told, stay in a bedroom, don't come out. She does come out. And you have the famous reuniting between Odysseus and his wife, Penelope. End of poem. End of story. And are you ready for this? The Greeks never again pick up the question of the storyline of Odysseus. Like, well, how does he grow old and die? Never mentioned again. Odysseus was such a sacred hero to the Greeks that they couldn't think of him as getting old. In the same way that some of you have a difficult time imagining that at some point Jackie Chan will have to stop making films because he's just gotten too old. And there will be a point when, in fact, that amazing athlete, we can't comment on his acting ability, but you will agree, he's an amazing athlete. That amazing athlete, if he lives long enough, will finally come to a point where he has to be helped to sit up in his hospital bed. And he can't eat his own food. See, we don't like to think in terms of that. We like our heroes to remain young and dynamic and vivacious, right? The Greeks never touched again. What happens to Odysseus? How does he die? We know how Achilles dies. We know how Agamemnon dies. We know how the great Ajax dies. We know how a lot of these guys of the ancient Greek heroes die. No story ever invented about how Odysseus dies. The Romans conquer the Greeks. And the Romans change the name of Odysseus to, in the Latin, remember Romans speak Latin, to Ulysses. So when you read the term Ulysses, think Odysseus. Same guy. But guess what? The Romans love Odysseus so much, they as well do not touch his death narrative. Nobody invents a story about how this guy goes down. Nobody tells the story about how he dies, right? It is only later in time that finally poets pick up the story about how Odysseus might die. Tennyson will now do it. All right, we're ready for the poem now. I've given you enough of an introduction so that now we can read the poem and have some sense of what we're looking at. Tennyson asks a very interesting question. What does the greatest hero in the history of the world do when he gets old? Because Tennyson says there ain't but two choices. One, he sits in some old folks' home, watches Vanna turn letters, and waits for his strained asparagus, and he waits to die. Or, two, he has another way to go. And it ain't sitting in no old folks' home, watching Vanna turn letters. No way, no how. Tennyson will make an interesting observation about this hero Odysseus now that he's old. But the way Tennyson writes the poem is to imagine the old fart Ulysses, Odysseus, actually speaking. And he's speaking out loud, and what is it that he says? Well, now we'll turn to the poem. And as you read this poem, it'll do you much better if you imagine the old man, Ulysses, talking about first his past, then his present, and finally his future. Let's take a look at what he has to say about what it means to get old, right? What it means to grow old. Now, you'll do much better if you follow along on page 971. Sit up, pay close attention. You don't need to worry about taking any notes while we read. Let's just read this poem in its entirety and then worry about exegesis a little bit later, shall we? So read along. I've had students that say, sometimes these poems make better sense when I listen to you read them out loud to me. That would make sense. And so let's take a look. The old man, Odysseus, Ulysses, speaking about now his life as an old man. And he goes in three directions. One, he recognizes first and thinks about his past. Two, he thinks about the present, and then finally the future. We'll begin, though, right at the opening lines with the present, where we're told things are not going very well. He's an old man who has become, on his own island of Ithaca, forgotten. In the same way that there are people who, during their heyday, could not have imagined that there's anybody up on Mr. Doer's wall that you would ever look at and say, who is that? Those people were so famous during their heyday. Of course, their heyday is now past, and the Kennedy year is now over. And all those pictures of all those people, unless you're told who they are, you don't know them anymore. And a lot of those people are still alive. And nobody really knows who they are anymore. Right? Same thing has happened for old Odysseus, Ulysses. He's an old man now. And even the people of Ithaca no longer know who he is. What to do? Let's take a look. Read it with me. I'm on 971. Just read along as I read. Again, you'll do much better for yourself if you just pay attention to the language of the words as we go. It little profits that an idle king, by this still hearth among these barren crags, matched with an aged wife, I meet and dole unequal laws unto a savage race that hoard and sleep and feed and know not. I cannot rest from travels. I will drink life to the lees. All times I have enjoyed greatly, have suffered greatly, both with those that loved me and alone. On shore, and when through scudding drifts the rainy Hyades vex the dim sea, I am become a name. For always roaming with a hungry heart, much have I seen and known. Cities of men and manners, climate, councils, governments, myself not least, but honored of them all, and drunk delight of battle with my peers far on the ringing plains of windy Troy. I am part of all that I have met, yet all experience is an arch wherethrough gleams that untraveled world, whose margin fades forever and forever when I move. How dull it is to pause, to make an end, to rust unburnished, not to shine in use, as though to breathe were life. Life piled on life were all too little, and of one domain little remains. But every hour is saved from that eternal silence something more, a bringer of new things. And violet were for some 3 suns to store and hoard myself in this gray spirit, yearning and desire to follow knowledge like a sinking star beyond the utmost bounds of human thought. This is my son, mine own Telemachus, to whom I leave the scepter and the isle, well loved of me, discerning to fulfill this labor, and by slow prudence to make mild the rugged people, and through soft degrees subdue them to the useful and the good. Most blameless is he, centered in the sphere of common duties, decent not to fail in offices of tenderness, and pay meed adoration to my household gods when I am gone. He works his work, I mine. There lies the port. The vessel puffs her sail. There gloom the dark, broad seas. My mariners, souls that have toiled and wrought and thought with me, that ever with a frolic welcome took the thunder and the sunshine, and opposed free hearts, free foreheads. You and I are old. Old age hath yet his honor and his toil. Death closes all. But something ere the end, some work of noble note may yet be done, not unbecoming men that strove with gods. The lights begin to twinkle from the rocks. The long day wanes, the slow moon climbs, the deep moans round with many voices. Come, my friends, 'tis not too late to seek a newer world. Push off, and sitting well in order, smite the sounding furrows, for my purpose holds to sail beyond the sunset and the baths of all the western stars until I die. It may be that the gulfs will wash us down. It may be we shall touch the happy isles and see the great Achilles whom we knew. Though much is taken, much abides. And though we are not now that strength which in old days moved earth and heaven, that which we are, we are. One equal temper of heroic hearts, made weak by time and fate, but strong in will, to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. Now, our project for the remainder of the hour is exegesis. And we want to point out right away that this poem naturally divides into a number of parts. And so in our annotations, we want to pay attention to that. And as we go, we want to pay attention to answering the simple question, I believe, 1 or 2 of us writing on this topic, of what it means to grow old. And what are the options available to growing old? But again, I want to come back and point out, this poem is read when it is published. And can I say this? This poem becomes really, really famous in the history of England. It is not only read as a personal call, but it is as well read, see, can you see it? Watch this. Come, my friends, 'tis not too late to seek a newer world. Push off, and sitting well in order, smite the sounding furrows. For my purpose holds to sail beyond the sunset and the baths of all the western stars until I die. Right? So you can easily read this poem if you are Schaefer, having just lost his job at the shoe factory. And he's depressed, as is Miss Barnard, as is a number of other people lost their... to say, well, it's over. England is clearly done for. I mean, remember where Logue came from. Where did Logue come from? He came from Boston, from the United States, right? That's an important part of our story, you'll remember. Notice you can hear Tennyson saying to the English people, it's not over yet. We still have work to do, right? So that notion of being old and yet still having something to do will be central to understanding this poem. Let's exegete now quickly. Notice, it little profits that an idle king. What does idle mean? He's got nothing to do anymore. By this still hearth. Uh-oh, the fire's not burning anymore. Among these barren crags, matched, with an aged wife. Penelope, yeah, nobody's fighting to marry Penelope anymore, right? She's now become but ugly and old. Sorry about that. And he meets and doles unequal laws unto a savage race that hoard and sleep and feed. They don't even know who he is. Question, what to do? Options, only two. One, sit around and wait to die. Watch Vanna turn letters in an old folks' home. Two, I cannot rest from travels. I will drink life to the lees. Now that's an interesting word picture if and only if you understand the following. The Greeks loved their beer, but they didn't drink their beer like we do today out of bottles or glasses. No, not enough beer could fit in any kind of a glass. They invented large mixing bowls. We would call them mixing bowls. Bowls so big it takes two hands to pick them up. And the beer goes in the large bowl. You pick it up with both hands, but there's mixtures of the beer depending on how far down you drink. If you only want to have a drink but not get drunk, you'll just drink a little off of the top. But if you drink all the way down to the sludge at the bottom, the lees, guaranteed, you're going to have more than just a buzz. What does it mean to say, I will drink life to the lees? Write that down. What does it mean to you to say that? I will drink life to the lees sounds a lot like, I'll make a 3A observation here. You'll remember Thoreau said in his text in Walden, he didn't want to die and not have lived. You'll remember he said he wanted to feel like a dog biting on a bone. He wanted to bite the very marrow, the center out of the bone. What does it mean to say you're going to live life to the lees? Live life to the fullest. You got it. Write it down. That's exactly what he's saying. I will live life to the fullest. He says, I will drink life to the lees. Then he looks backwards. This is easy. Makes sense. The great warrior who many, many years before fought at the walls of Troy. Look what he says. All times I have enjoyed greatly, have suffered greatly. You know, he's had good times, he's had bad times. I have seniors that say, this is the poem of the senior year. In a lot of ways, this is the poem of the senior year. You have to feel older when you become a senior in high school. Later, that word senior will get used when you graduate from college, and then it'll get used when you become 65. Oh, that's coming. Unless, of course, you die early. Someday, somebody will call you a senior citizen. And at that moment, you're back to Ulysses. What does that mean? Senior citizen. He looks backwards. All times I have enjoyed greatly, have suffered greatly, both with those that love me and alone on shore, and with their scudding dress, the rainy Hyades vex the dim sea. I am become a name, he says. Look at it. For always roaming with a hungry heart, much have I seen and known. Cities of men and climates, councils, governments, myself not least but honored of them all. And drunk delight of battle with my peers, far on the ringing plains of windy Troy. In other words, he looks backwards and he says, I had a great life. I had a great life. I had all kinds of incredible opportunities. And I think it's fair to say that before you graduate, it's not a bad idea to become a little nostalgic and ask, in your high school career, what were the 5 things that you did that were most remarkable? If you start thinking about that question, almost inevitably, you find yourself thinking about somebody other than yourself. Go ahead, try it. It's quite fascinating. Ask to make a list of the 5 most important things that happened to you in high school. And I'll bet you money that 3 of the 5 have something to do with not just you, but somebody else. It becomes recollection that you don't go through life alone. And you certainly don't have the greatest moments of your life alone. Most of the time, those are experiences you have with others. And you want to call them back, as he does, on the ringing plains of windy Troy, he will say. He then continues by saying, I am part of all that I have met. Let's put it in our notes this way. There are no insignificant moments in your life. Everything has brought you to where you are now.
And how do you account for the fact that this morning you could have slept in and skipped, and you wouldn't be hearing my words right now? Which, when you're young and stupid, means who cares? But as you get older, you will find yourself realizing there are certain words that matter more than other words. And it might very well be the old man saying some of them now. I won't understand that for a long time, but I'll know because I heard them. You came this morning. Hurrah. He says, I'm part of all that I have met. Look what he says about experience, though. All experience is an arch where through gleams the much untraveled world, whose margin fades forever and forever when I move. No matter what experiences you have, there's always more waiting for you. Let's say it out loud. You have two ways to grow old. One, looking backwards. Two, looking what? Looking what? You got it. Forwards. From this point on, we're going to hear Ulysses say, I ain't looking backwards. I'm looking forwards. I will fight to the last moment of my life. You can see why the great Churchill, during the Second World War, loved this poem so much. Children were asked to memorize this poem. And they memorized every word. And they would say it out loud. I will say to you, a number of my seniors have memorized one or two lines of this poem, knowing full well they're going to get old. And when they do, that's the question. How do you grow old? Notice, as he continues, he will point out how dull it is to pause, to make an end, to rust unburnished, not to shine in use. You ever been to a farm where you see an old piece of machinery lying over there in the weeds, all rusty, not used anymore? Ulysses says, I don't want to be that piece of machinery. How dull it is to pause, to make an end, to rust unburnished, not to shine in use. And look what he says next. As though to breathe were life. Breathing in and out is not life. Look what he says. Life piled on life. You read it with me. Life piled on life is all too little. And of one to me, little remains. I was just talking with an old fart about 2 hours ago. And he said to me, it's kind of weird. When you hit 70, he said, you start thinking more about your past than about your future because you don't have much of your future left. Ulysses would say about that, oh, I got a lot of future left. Look what he says. Life piled on life are all too little, and of one to me little remains. But every hour saved from that eternal silence, something more, a bringer of new things, and violet were for some 3 sons to store and hoard myself. And this gray spirit yearning in desire, look what he says, to follow knowledge like a sinking star beyond the utmost bounds of human thought. The voyage for Ulysses is like following the star, always in front, always in front, always in front, always looking. But wait a minute. Before he leaves, he's got to take care of the political mess that has become Ithaca. He says, this is my son, mine own Telemachus, to whom I leave the scepter and the owl. Brian, what does that mean? What's he going to do? He's going to leave Ithaca, and who's going to be in charge? His boy. He's going to leave Ithaca to his son. Why? Where's he going to go? He will say about his boy, he works his work, I mine. Where's he going to go? You have to imagine now the old fart standing inside of his room, looking out the window, down to the harbor. There lies the port. The vessel puffs her sails. There gloom the dark, broad seas. In other words, what's Ulysses about to do? He's going to go on his last voyage. Yes. Look how he calls, my mariners. Now, hey, readers of this poem of the day immediately understood. He could have said, my English brothers and sisters, easily. We're back to this model on my whiteboard. The collective uh-oh is starting to happen. And Tennyson will say to England, oh, no, we don't. Notice, my mariners, souls that have toiled and wrought and fought with me, you're reading, that ever with a frolic welcome took the thunder and the sunshine and opposed free hearts, free foreheads. You and I are old. So what I love about this poem, he doesn't try to imagine that somehow with a little bit of Buns of Steel's video and cosmetic surgery, you can pretend like you're not getting old anymore. No, he says it. He embraces the aging. Old age hath yet its honor and its toil. Death closes all, But something ere the end, some work of noble note, may yet be done, not unbecoming men that strove with gods. Put it in your own words. What's he say? You're going to be quoting these lines, obviously, in the paper that you're writing. That's why we're paying so close attention to them. You and I are old. Old age hath yet its honor and its toil. Means what? And see, here's the thing, and I don't want to upset, but a good number of you are going to watch somebody you love age before you actually do it. What will that be like? To watch your mom, your dad, the people you love, go old. So old that they can't do it alone. So old, you're going to have to walk up to your old man someday and say, Dad, I love you. You got to give me those keys. You ain't driving no more. I'm sorry. Your eyes can't do it. You need to go somewhere, you call me. You going to do that? You going to do that? Yeah, we kind of know that's coming. That's coming, right? How do you grow old? Notice Ulysses here. Yeah, we're old, but old age hath yet its honor and its toil. Death closes all, but something ere the end, some work of noble note, may yet be done, not unbecoming men that strove with gods. And then the final lines, quoted by the Kennedy family. I mentioned the Kennedys earlier. They loved this part of the poem. The lights begin to twinkle from the rocks. The long day wanes. The slow moon climbs. So what time of the day are we at? What time are we at? We in early morning? No. It's sunset, isn't it? The lights begin to twinkle from the rocks. The long day wanes. The slow moon climbs. The deep moans round with many voices. And then again he calls to the English people as a reader. Look at what he says next. These, of course, the most famous lines. Come, my friends. Right? Look at it. Read it with me. Come, my friends. 'Tis not too late to seek a newer world. Whoa, see, watch my whiteboard. Come, my friends. 'Tis not too late to seek a newer world. But push off and sitting well in order, smite the sounding furrows. Row together. These are powerful images. And just a few years later, let's call it 1880. 50 years later will be what year, roughly? See, think about this. You forget your history. 50 years after 1880, what year is it? What do you know about England in 1940? What do you know about what happens in England in 1940 with the rise of Hitler and the Nazis? Right. They attacked that small island of England with all of the planes they have, dropping so many bombs. England, London has to be pretty much evacuated. And yet, that Battle of Britain is won by the English, with whose help? That's right. That's right. The Americans, of course, have a huge role to play in the winning of that Battle of Britain. And yet, these lines become really famous during that time as well. Come, my friends, 'tis not too late to seek a newer world. Push off and sitting well in order. Smite the sounding furrows. For my purpose holds to sail beyond the sunset and the baths of all the western stars until I die. Whoa, put it in your own words. What's he going to do? What's he going to do as an old fart? Is he going to sit in an old folks' home and watch Van and Turn Letters? Reading House says, no, that doesn't sound like a guy ready to give up on his living, right? Sitting well in order, smite the sounding furrows, for my purpose holds. Really, what is his purpose? You'll quote these lines in your paper, won't you? For my purpose holds. To do what? To sail beyond the sunset and the baths of all the western stars until I die. Whoa. He's willing to accept the fact. He knows it's coming. He will go to meet it. He will not wait for it to come to him. If you have been blessed in your young life to meet any old fart that has this kind of attitude, you should this afternoon or this evening go up to him or her and say thank you. Because you don't meet very many old people like this that still have the fire in the belly. It may be the gulfs will wash us down. We may drown. It may be that we shall touch the happy isles and greet the great Achilles, whom we knew. We may die and all go down to Hades, where we're going to see Achilles. Achilles, at this point, already dead. Remember, he falls at the walls of Troy by getting shot in his heel. Remember that? Much is taken, much abides. And though we are not now that strength which in old days moved earth and heaven. Do you see it? This is his telling the English people. He is speaking directly to Schaefer and to Barnard, who have lost their opportunities at the shoe factory. And yet there it is. He is saying, we're not what we used to be. We are not what we once were. Take a look at how he finishes. And though much is taken, much abides. And though we are not now that strength which in old days moved earth and heaven, that which we are. We are. What are we? See, Schaefer would be asking a question like this. The owner of our shoe factory would be asking a question like that. What are we? See, we're back to this. What are we? One equal temper of heroic hearts. Interesting word picture. He uses the word picture of a sword. How is a sword made? The metals, different metals, pressed together in the fire. That's how a sword is made, right? One equal temper of heroic hearts. And then look at the honesty. Made weak by time and fate. No doubt, no doubt. He says, we're not what we used to be. We are clearly weaker than we once were. Yes, Logan showed up. He admits it. Logan showed up to Schaefer. He admits it. He doesn't blink an eye. Made weak by time and fate. But look at the last lines. Strong in, what's the word? Will. Strong in will. To strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. I've had students that write those words down and stick it on their dorm wall, and here's why. In 400 days, a few of you are going to sit inside of an empty dorm room and you're going to ask the question out loud, why am I here? Things will not be going well. You will not be happy maybe. And you will be ready to quit. And these lines will come back to you if you allow them. To strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. Okay, now we can turn easily to our question that we'll be writing for our assignment. Let's take